The first rain that slammed the fresh asphalt didn't sound right. It wasn't the soft, living whisper I'd grown up hearing on Emerald Spring Pond. This was a dead, metallic clack clack clack, like skeletal fingers drumming on a coffin. They thought they'd won. Karen Langley, with her flawless blonde bob, pearl necklace tight enough to choke truth itself, and that syrupy smile she weaponized at every HOA meeting, stood on the new parking lot like a queen who'd just conquered a kingdom. She and her board of nodding sheep had paved over my family's soul for guest parking and community enhancement. But Karen made one tiny geological mistake. She forgot that water always remembers the way home, and I was the guy who knew exactly how to open the door. I'm Ethan Brooks, former combat engineer, the guy everyone now called that bitter pond guy in the Serenity Grove Estates newsletter. I stood at my window watching those first drops hunt for the home they'd lost, and I smiled for the first time in months. Because the trap I'd spent 6 silent weeks building was about to spring, and Karen Langley was standing right in the splash zone. To understand why the revenge felt so delicious, you have to see the crime in all its ridiculous glory. It didn't begin with rain on blacktop. It began with the gentle lap of water against the silvered dock my dad and I built when I was 10. Emerald Spring Pond wasn't just water on my 4-acre slice of heaven. It was the heartbeat of the land my family had owned since the valley was still orchards. That deep, spring-fed bowl kept the groundwater clean, cooled the air, and hosted more life than Karen's Botoxed brain could ever comprehend. Blue herons, based the size of my forearm, bullfrogs that sang me to sleep every summer night. It was the last living piece of my dad after the heart attack took him. Then Serenity Grove Estates metastasized like a beige cancer across the hill. Suddenly, my wild little paradise butted up against their identical McMansions and perfectly mowed lawns. Enter Karen Langley, newly elected HOA president, golf shirt tight across her spray-tan chest, always calling everyone sweetie, while her eyes calculated property values like a cash register. The first shots were pure comedy. I got a certified letter because my cattails were unsightly. Another because the frogs were noise pollution after 9 p.m. I replied with county ordinances and a polite photo of a great blue heron. Karen's reply email dripped honey. Ethan, darling, we're all about harmony here. Let's be team players. The real war started at the annual Community Values mixer in the sterile clubhouse. Karen stood under the crystal chandelier, voice sweet as artificial sweetener. Neighbors, our biggest issue is guest parking. SUVs everywhere. But I have a brilliant solution. She clicked her laser pointer, and the screen lit up with a glossy rendering of my pond turned into a sparkling asphalt lot with white lines and fake palm trees. We'll remediate the geological hazard that is Emerald Spring Pond and create 30 new spaces. Safety first. Her pet consultant from Summit Geotech, some slick guy in a suit that cost more than my truck, flashed scary red graphics claiming the pond was eroding the hill and threatening every foundation downhill. The room gasped on cue. Karen clasped her hands like a saint. It's unfortunate, but we must protect our investments. I stood up, heart hammering, but voice steady. I'm a licensed civil engineer with 12 years in the Army Corps. I've run the numbers. That pond is a natural retention basin. Draining it will spike flood risk, not fix it. Here's my 40-page report with historical data, groundwater models, everything. I passed copies around. Silence. Then Karen smiled the smile of someone who already owned the room. Oh, Ethan, how passionate. We all admire your personal attachment. But we have a professional report from insured experts. You're the owner. Obvious conflict of interest, sweetie. She turned to the sheep. Safety or sentiment? Vote now. 47 hands shot up. Mine stayed down. The gavel banged. My lake was sentenced to death. The machines rolled and 6 days later. Yellow monsters growling at the edge of my paradise. I watched from the dock as they snaked hoses into the crystal water. The pumps screamed. 2 full days they bled my pond dry. Fish flopped in shrinking mud. Old man heron circled once, screamed like he was cursing them, then flew away forever. When the last trickle disappeared, the silence was louder than any pump. Karen drove by in her white Range Rover, window down, and actually waved. Looking forward to that beautiful new parking plaza, Ethan. Property values up 12% already. I didn't wave back. I just stared until her taillights disappeared. Inside, the combat engineer took over. Grief flash froze into cold, surgical focus. Because while they were celebrating, I'd noticed something in the exposed lake bed, geometric cracks in the clay capstone, faint moisture seeping upward. The pond hadn't just been pretty water. It had been holding back an artesian aquifer under massive pressure. Karen had just removed the cork. Waiting isn't passive when you're an engineer. It's preparation with a smile. I became the neighborhood ghost. Stopped answering Karen's sugary, just checking on you emails. Let the grass grow an inch past regulation. Earn me a $250 fine I paid with a smile. When neighbors asked how I was doing, I gave them the dead-eyed veteran stare until they backed away, muttering, "Poor guy finally broke." Karen drove past twice a week, slowing her Range Rover to peer through tinted glass, probably admiring her victory. Once she even gave me the little finger wave you give a kicked dog. Perfect. Let her think I was defeated. Arrogance is the best blindfold. While she was busy sending the HOA newsletter bragging about the most successful community enhancement project in county history, I was in my office surrounded by old surveys and satellite maps. My cover story was genius because it was almost true. I filed county permits for a residential geothermal heating and cooling system, deep boreholes to harness earth energy and fight the new heat island from their stupid parking lot. The public notice went up on a tiny sign at my driveway. I could practically hear Karen laughing with her book club. Look at poor Ethan, lost his pond so now he's drilling holes like a conspiracy theorist. The rig I rented was compact, loud enough to be noticed, but not alarming. Every dawn I fired it up, drilling a careful grid targeting the stress fractures I'd mapped from the dried lake bed. Each hole was a tiny key, deep enough to score the capstone, but not pierce it. 14 perfect scores in tempered glass. One hole does nothing. 14 along the fault lines. The whole sheet waits for the slightest pressure to explode. The work was brutal. Hands raw, back screaming, sleep a distant memory. But every night when I cleaned the rig under the work lights, I'd glance downhill at Karen's white-columned mansion glowing like a wedding cake and feel that cold certainty settle in my gut. I wasn't just drilling dirt. I was drilling every petty find, every condescending sweetie, every neighbor who'd raised their hand to kill my father's legacy. 5 weeks later, the last hole was done. I returned the rig, posted the completion certificate, and went back to ghost mode. The trap was set. All I needed was Mother Nature's trigger finger. I became a weather addict. Jet stream maps, ocean temps, barometric pressure. The late summer dragged hot and dry. Then one Tuesday, the local weatherman got serious. Folks, we're tracking a massive atmospheric river. Potential for once-in-a-generation rainfall. Ground is already saturated. Prepare for flash flooding. I turned off the TV. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a loaded gun. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder. It crept in like a predator. Sky turned bruise green. Air thickened until it felt like breathing soup. I sat in my armchair, coffee going cold, eyes locked on the black parking lot. First drops were fat and slow. Then the sky opened like God had kicked over a bucket. In 20 minutes, the entire 2-acre lot vanished under a churning brown lake. Karen's community enhancement became an accidental retention pond. Water spilled over curbs and started its slow march toward the mansions. I felt it before I heard it, a low, bone-deep hum rising from the earth itself. The parking lot surface began to bubble like it was boiling from below. Then the first spiderweb crack appeared. A hiss. A groan. Suddenly the center buckled upward and exploded. A 20-foot geyser of mud, gravel, and pressurized water shot into the sky. Then another. And another. My 14 boreholes became 14 geysers of pure geological rage. The earth was finally breathing out after 1,000 years of being choked. The geysers merged into a single roaring river of destruction. It tore through manicured lawns like they were tissue paper, ripped century-old oaks out by the roots, flung stone benches like toys. And it had a target. I watched the main current carve straight toward the bottom of the hill, straight toward the gleaming white columns of Karen Langley's mansion. The retaining wall lasted 3 seconds before it disintegrated. Wicker patio furniture spun away like driftwood. Then the massive floor-to-ceiling basement windows bowed inward and exploded. A wall of brown fury poured into her lower level. Lights flickered and died. Karen's perfect palace became a waterlogged tomb. Dawn came gray and unnaturally quiet. My property sat like a green island in a sea of brown ruin. Below, a new angry riverbed snaked through what used to be Serenity Grove's pride and joy. The parking lot looked like a war zone. Shattered slabs tilted at crazy angles around a bubbling crater where the main spring now flowed free. Down the hill, half a dozen basements wore thick mud skirts. Cars sat at weird angles half buried in silt. And at the very bottom, Karen's mansion stood dark and violated. White columns stained the color of shame, windows like empty eye sockets staring at the sky. By 8 a.m., the street was a circus of flashing lights, fire trucks, utility vans, news crews circling like vultures. Then the mud-splattered county sheriff's Explorer rolled straight up my driveway. Sheriff Brody stepped out, eyes scanning my pristine yard and the faint tire tracks from the rig. "Mr. Brooks, we have questions. This mess seems to have started right about here." I invited him and the county's chief engineer inside. They grilled me hard, drilling timeline, my background, obvious motive. I let them talk. Then I slid the thick, 3-ring binder across the table. Here's every permit, every county inspection, every hydrological report I submitted to the HOA warning exactly this would happen. All legal. All signed off. The engineer flipped pages. Her expression went from suspicion to shock. "These are in perfect order. But why the extensive system now?" I looked her dead in the eye. After the HOA paved 2 acres of impermeable surface right next to my property, I had concerns. I submitted a full report to President Langley detailing the flood risk. It's in the May minutes, page 7B. They chose to ignore it. Brody and the engineer exchanged the look I'd been waiting months to see. The spotlight swung downhill and locked onto Karen's flooded palace like a prison searchlight. The investigation was brutal and beautiful. Subpoenas flew. They found the kickbacks, Karen's secret deal with the sham Summit Geotech firm she partly owned through a shell company. Fraud. Reckless endangerment. The HOA filed bankruptcy under an avalanche of lawsuits. Karen's personal assets were seized. Last I saw of her was on the evening news, hunched in a wrinkled designer suit, pearls missing, scurrying past reporters with her head down, while neighbors she'd once ruled screamed for her blood. Today, the lower half of Serenity Grove is a declared geological hazard zone. The ruined houses are gone. The shattered parking lot is gone. In their place, the spring has carved a gentle new path, creating a wetland where cattails sway and dragonflies dance like stained glass. This morning, I saw a great blue heron standing in the shallows exactly where Karen's marble fountain used to be. I didn't cause the flood. I didn't summon the storm. I simply removed the plug Karen had pulled and let the land heal itself. She tried to pave over memory because it was inconvenient. She learned the hard way that you can never truly bury a spring. Water always finds its way home. So tell me in the comments, was I wrong to let the water remember its path? Or was Karen's HOA tyranny the real crime here? Who was truly at fault? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one.